Psalm 23 is often treated like a blanket for frightened people. But before it comforts fear, it confronts pride. It begins with a sentence, "The modern heart resists more than it admits. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." Psalm 23:1 does not say the Lord is my assistant, my emergency contact, or the quiet presence I invite after I have already chosen my own road. It says He is my shepherd. That means I am not. David does not begin this psalm with a crown, a victory, a throne, or a spiritual achievement. He begins with need. And that is why Psalm 23 can be both gentle and disturbing. We want the psalm to soothe us, but the first line asks us to surrender the illusion that we know the way. We love the promise of green pastures. We struggle with the authority of being led. So maybe Psalm 23 is not the song of a life without danger. Maybe it is the song of a soul that has finally stopped trying to be its own shepherd. And that leaves one question beneath every line. Where are you still asking God to comfort you while refusing to let Him lead you? "The Lord is my shepherd" sounds tender, until it asks you to stop pretending you are not a sheep. A sheep is not known for controlling the map. It does not survive because it is impressive, strategic, emotionally untouchable, or always aware of what waits around the bend. A sheep survives because it belongs to a shepherd who sees what it cannot see, notices danger before it understands danger, and leads it toward provision it could never find by instinct alone. That image can comfort the weary. It can offend the proud. David understood shepherding before he understood the throne. Before Israel saw a king, the field saw a boy with dust on his sandals, the smell of grass and animals on his clothes, and a staff worn smooth by his hand. Shepherding was not a soft religious painting to him. It was attention, patience, protection, long hours under open sky, the low sound of animals shifting in the dark, the responsibility of noticing one wandering sheep before the wilderness swallowed it. So when David says, "The Lord is my shepherd," he is not using a decorative metaphor. He is surrendering the role of guide. That is where Psalm 23 begins to confront us. We often want the comfort of a shepherd without the authority of being led. We want protection without correction, presence without surrender, rescue without redirection. But a shepherd is not sentimental decoration in a sheep's life. A shepherd decides where the sheep cannot safely decide for itself. That is harder to receive than comfort. We want God close enough to bless our plans, but not close enough to interrupt them. We want Him to calm our anxiety, but not expose the habit that keeps feeding it. We want Him to protect us from enemies, but not pull us away from paths where our own pride keeps wandering. I know that tension. There have been nights when I closed the Bible gently, not because I had obeyed what I read, but because I was tired of what it was asking me to face. I wanted the shepherd's comfort, but I did not want the shepherd's authority. I wanted peace without being corrected, relief without being redirected. And that is the strange honesty of this psalm. The sheep's safety begins when it stops calling independence strength. We carry burdens God never assigned to us. We rehearse outcomes we cannot control. We watch people's faces for approval, as if human reaction were the pasture where our identity must feed. We keep checking the road ahead, the road behind, the side paths, the exits, the risks, the imagined disasters. Then we wonder why our souls feel thin. The sheep does not say, "I shall not want," because the sheep has solved every problem. It says it because the shepherd is enough. That does not mean the believer never feels lack, grief, hunger, loss, or unanswered questions. David's life would destroy that shallow reading. He knew danger, betrayal, exile, fear, and failure. Psalm 23 is not saying, "Nothing painful will ever touch me." It is saying, "Nothing essential can finally be taken from me when the Lord Himself is my shepherd." Need may remain, but panic loses its throne. If the Lord is your shepherd, your life is not being held together by your ability to foresee everything. Your future is not safe because your hands never shake. Your soul is not secure because you never make mistakes. Your deepest safety is not your grip on God, but His faithful care over you. That truth may not remove every tremor from your hands, but it changes what the trembling means. You can be unsure and still led. You can be weak and still watched. You can be corrected and still loved. You can be in need and still not abandoned. And once David names the shepherd, the next line surprises us. The shepherd does not first command the exhausted sheep to move faster. He makes it lie down. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. That line can sound like a peaceful painting hung in a quiet hallway. Soft grass, clear water, warm light on a field. But the verb matters. He makes me lie down. David does not say, "He suggests that I rest." He does not say, "He waits until I finally decide I have earned rest." He says the shepherd makes him lie down. Not because the shepherd is harsh, but because sheep often do not know when to stop. A sheep will not lie down easily if it feels threatened, hungry, restless, or disturbed. It needs safety before it can settle. So the green pasture is not only a beautiful place, it is a sign that the shepherd knows how to bring the soul into a safety deep enough for striving to loosen its grip. That may be one of the hardest gifts God gives. Rest, not escape, not laziness, not pretending everything is fine. Rest that comes from trusting someone more than you trust your own urgency. Many people are exhausted not only because they have too much to do, but because they live as if everything depends on them. The body sits down, but the soul keeps pacing. A cup of tea grows cold beside an open Bible. The room is quiet, but inside there are still arguments, unfinished messages, imagined conversations, future fears, and old regrets moving from wall to wall. We call it responsibility. Sometimes it is unbelief with a tired face. I do not say that carelessly. Some burdens are real. Some people are carrying families, grief, sickness, pressure, bills, and decisions that cannot be solved by a soft sentence. Psalm 23 does not shame the weary. It reveals the difference between carrying what God has given you and carrying the illusion that you must be God over your own life. The shepherd leads beside still waters because sheep are easily frightened by rushing streams. They need water, but they need it in a form they can receive. That is tender. God does not only know what your soul needs, He knows how fragile you are when you need it. He does not mock you for being unable to drink from chaos. He leads you towards stillness. He brings truth in ways the soul can swallow. Sometimes that looks like a quiet conviction. Sometimes it looks like a verse you have read before, suddenly heavy with mercy. Sometimes it is the small interruption when your hand reaches for the phone, and something inside you whispers, "Not yet." Let God speak before the noise does. Still waters are not always found in perfect circumstances. Sometimes they are found in one surrendered refusal to leave the phone face down, to let one evening remain unfinished, to stop rehearsing what you cannot control, to pray one honest sentence instead of performing spiritual strength, to say, "Lord, I am tired, and I do not know how to rest without feeling guilty." Green pasture is not proof that nothing is wrong in life. It is proof that the shepherd can provide rest even while life is unfinished. But this is where the psalm cuts against our age. We often do not want to be made to lie down. We want God to strengthen us so we can keep running at the same damaging pace. We want spiritual energy for the life that is quietly draining us. We want Him to bless the schedule, the striving, the pressure, the need to be available, the fear of disappointing people. But sometimes the shepherd's mercy is not more energy. Sometimes His mercy is interruption. He makes me lie down because I would keep moving until collapse looked like faithfulness. He stops the sheep before the sheep destroys itself by continuing. That means rest is not always a reward for finishing everything. Sometimes rest is obedience before everything is finished. Sometimes faith looks like leaving tomorrow in God's hands while the table is still messy. The inbox is still full, and the heart still feels tempted to prove its worth by staying exhausted. A soul that never stops may not notice how wounded it has become. And once the soul finally stops running, the next line becomes possible. He restores my soul. He restores my soul is one of the most tender lines in Scripture because it tells the truth without shame. The soul can be depleted, not only the body, not only the schedule, the soul. There is a kind of tiredness that sleep alone cannot reach. You can wake up after 8 hours and still feel thin inside. You can answer messages, keep responsibilities moving, smile at the right moments, and still sense that something deep within you has lost its color. David does not say, "I restore myself." He says, "He restores my soul." That matters because many of us try to heal ourselves with the same pace, pressure, and control that wounded us. We turn restoration into another task, another system, another demand to become better quickly so no one notices how empty we have become. But a soul is not a machine. It cannot be repaired by force. Restoration means being brought back, not merely being patched up. The shepherd does not simply give the sheep a better mood. He brings the wandering life back into its proper place, back to God, back to truth, back to breath, back to humility, back to the path the soul could not find while scattered. Restoration is not always dramatic. Sometimes it sounds like the first honest breath after you stop lying to yourself. Sometimes it looks like sitting on the edge of the bed with your hands open instead of clenched. Sometimes it is the slow recognition that you have been living as if God's love depended on your usefulness. I have confused usefulness with life before. I have answered messages with an empty heart, accepted responsibilities I had no strength to carry, and called it faithfulness because admitting exhaustion felt too much like failure. I have mistaken being needed for being alive. I have let a full calendar protect me from the quiet question I did not want to answer. What remains of me when I am not producing? There was a strange comfort in being needed. It made emptiness look noble. But the shepherd does not restore your soul so you can return to the same exhaustion with better language. He does not restore you merely so you can become productive again. That is how the world thinks. Rest, recover, return to output. Psalm 23 is deeper. He restores my soul. then leads me in paths of righteousness. Restoration is not God refueling my ambition. It is God returning me to the road where my soul can live truthfully again. That road may not flatter the old self. It may lead away from a relationship that kept you anxious, away from a habit that numbed you but never healed you, away from a version of success that looked fruitful in public but made prayer feel hollow in private, away from the path where everyone approved, but your conscience kept growing quieter. That can feel like loss at first. But a restored soul begins to recognize the difference between familiar roads and righteous paths. One road keeps you useful while you slowly disappear. The other brings you back to God. Paths of righteousness are not merely moral rules. They are right roads, straight paths, ways that fit the character of the shepherd. God leads us there for his name's sake, meaning his faithfulness is tied to his own character. He is not careless with the soul that bears his name. That is both comfort and correction. Comfort, because restoration does not depend on your ability to invent a way back. Correction, because restoration will not always take you where your old desires wanted to go. The shepherd is not only healing your wounds, he is rescuing you from the roots that keep reopening them. Once David teaches us that the shepherd restores and leads, he does not pretend the road stays bright forever. The pasture is real. The waters are real. The restoration is real. But now the path enters shadow. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. The psalm does not say, because the Lord is my shepherd, I will never enter the valley. It says the opposite. The shepherd's path can still pass through shadow. That truth protects us from a fragile faith that only knows how to live in sunlight. Many people quietly believe that if God is leading them, the road should always become easier, clearer, safer, and more visibly blessed. Then, when grief comes, when sickness comes, when conflict comes, when the future narrows, when loss takes the air out of the room, they begin to wonder if they missed God somewhere. Psalm 23 refuses that simple equation. The presence of a valley is not proof of the absence of the shepherd. There are paths that pass through low places, places where the air feels colder, where the light narrows, where the cliffs rise on both sides and the way forward does not feel open. You hear your own footsteps more loudly there. You notice your breathing. You become aware of how little control you truly have. And something remarkable happens in the language of the psalm. Before the valley, David speaks about God in the third person. He makes, he leads, he restores. But when the shadow falls, David speaks to God. You are with me. That small shift may be one of the most tender movements in the psalm. In the pasture, David can describe the shepherd. In the valley, he needs to address him. Pain does not destroy true theology. It turns theology into prayer. It takes what the mouth has said about God and asks whether the heart can speak directly to God when the shadow falls across the road. I have needed that lesson more than I wanted to admit. There have been valleys where I wanted God only to remove the darkness. I wanted an exit, an explanation, a clean answer, a door with light around the edges. But sometimes the mercy was not an immediate escape. Sometimes the mercy was discovering that the shepherd had not stepped away simply because the landscape had changed. I will fear no evil does not mean David feels nothing. It means fear no longer holds final authority. Evil may be real. Death may cast a shadow. The valley may be dark enough to make your hands search for something solid, but the shepherd is closer than the shadow. That is why David says, "Your rod and your staff, they comfort me." The rod was for defense. The staff was for guidance and rescue. One protected from enemies. The other pulled the sheep back from danger. Comfort, in Psalm 23, is not sentimental softness. It is the strong care of a shepherd who can both fight what threatens you and correct what endangers you. Some of us want the staff, but not the rod. We want gentle guidance, but we forget we need protection from forces stronger than ourselves. Others want the rod, but not the staff. We want God to fight our enemies, but we resist when He pulls us away from our own foolish paths. The shepherd's comfort includes both. Through. That word matters too. I walk through the valley. The valley is not named as home. It is a passage. You may not be able to see the end yet. You may not know how long the shadow will stretch. But the shepherd does not lead his sheep into the valley to abandon them there. He walks with them through it. And here, Psalm 23 does not remain only an ancient song beside still waters. In John 10, Jesus steps into the image and gives the shepherd a face. "I am the good shepherd," he says. He does not only lead the sheep away from danger, he lays down his life for them. David said, "You are with me." Jesus shows how far that witness will go. The valley of death is not foreign to him. He entered the deepest shadow, so his people would never have to walk any shadow without him. That does not make suffering easy, but it makes the shepherd unmistakably near. And when the valley teaches the soul to speak directly to God, the psalm opens into an even stranger image. The shepherd becomes host, and the place of danger becomes a table. "You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies." That line is almost shocking if you slow down enough to see it. God does not wait until every enemy is gone before He prepares the table. The threat is still nearby. The pressure has not fully vanished. The accusers, fears, losses, memories, or visible opponents have not disappeared from the landscape. And yet, there is a table. A table means more than survival. It means fellowship, provision, honor, a place to sit. Most of us would prefer God to remove the enemies first. Then we would eat. Then we would breathe. Then we would believe we are safe. But Psalm 23 shows a different kind of confidence. The shepherd can nourish you before the battle feels completely over. That is hard to receive. Because when enemies are present, the soul tends to stay standing, alert, defensive, ready to explain, prove, answer, brace, or run. The shoulders tighten, the jaw sets. One eye stays on the threat, and one eye on the exit. Even when provision is in front of us, fear can keep our whole body turned toward danger. But God prepares a table, not a weapon rack. A table. This does not mean we ignore danger or pretend harm is harmless. David knew real enemies. Scripture is not naive about evil. But the table reveals that your enemies do not decide whether you are cared for. They do not decide whether you are honored. They do not decide whether God can feed you in a place they thought would destroy you. The miracle is not that the enemies vanish. The miracle is that they are no longer the host. The enemies may still be present, but they are not in charge of the meal. They do not set the table. They do not choose the portion. They do not decide whether you are welcome. The shepherd becomes the host, and that means your peace is no longer negotiated with what threatens you. Maybe the deepest victory is not that the enemies are forced to watch you win. Maybe the deepest victory is that they are no longer the center of your attention. God does not prepare the table so you can stare at your enemies with fuller hands. He prepares it so you can turn your face toward the host. That is different. Some people remain spiritually hungry because they keep standing in the posture of battle even when God is inviting them to sit. The bread is there, the cup is there, the shepherd is near, but the nervous system still acts as if receiving would be dangerous. Hypervigilance can feel like wisdom when you have been hurt. I understand that. There are seasons when watching the threat feels safer than receiving the provision. At least watching feels responsible. At least bracing feels prepared. But if you never turn toward the table, the enemy still controls the direction of your attention. You anoint my head with oil, my cup overflows. In the ancient world, oil could signify welcome, blessing, consecration, and refreshment. The image is not bare survival, it is abundance. The cup is not barely filled enough to keep going, it overflows. But overflow does not always look like public success. Sometimes the cup overflows when your heart remains soft after betrayal, when prayer returns after numbness, when you can breathe again in a place that used to tighten your chest, when you stop letting enemies name you, when the approval you lost no longer owns your sense of worth. The table is not just about receiving something from God, it is about learning where to sit. You do not have to stand forever in the posture of defense. You do not have to make the enemy the altar where all your attention is offered. You do not have to wait until every threat is removed before you receive what God has already placed before you. Sit where the shepherd gives. Eat what fear did not prepare. Receive what the enemy cannot cancel. That is a quiet victory. It is not loud or showy. It is the quiet victory of learning where to sit. The enemy may still be present, but it is no longer the center of the room. The shepherd is, the host is, the table is, the cup is, and when that becomes clear, the final line of Psalm 23 begins to shine with a different kind of confidence. David no longer speaks only of being led today. He speaks of being pursued all the days of his life. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life. Many of us imagine the past following us for darker reasons. Regret follows, failure follows, old shame follows, words we wish we could take back, choices we cannot undo, rooms where we were not the person we wanted to be. There are days when memory seems to walk behind us like a quiet accuser, waiting for the house to become still so it can speak again. But David says something else is following the sheep, goodness and mercy. The Hebrew idea behind follow can carry a sense stronger than casual trailing. It can mean pursuing, chasing, hunting down. That changes the picture. God's goodness and covenant mercy are not weak feelings lagging behind the believer. They are the faithful pursuit of the shepherd's love across the whole road, all the days. Not only the clean days, not only the obedient days, not only the days when your faith feels strong and your prayers sound beautiful, all the days. This does not make sin small. It makes mercy astonishing. The shepherd who leads you in righteousness is the same Lord whose mercy follows you when you stumble. He is holy enough to correct you and faithful enough not to discard you. That combination is life-changing. Some people are not afraid. God has no mercy. They are afraid mercy will not follow them into the places where they failed. They believe mercy waits in clean rooms, in better seasons, in versions of themselves they have not become yet. But David says mercy follows. It is not fragile. It is not easily embarrassed. It knows the road behind you, and still keeps coming. Even your past is not beyond the reach of God's faithful care. Mercy does not pretend the past did not happen. It follows you into the truth of it. It meets you where shame still sits. It refuses to let the worst chapter have the authority to name the whole book. I know what it is to be followed by a memory I did not want to name. A sentence, a season, a room in my past I kept walking around, hoping mercy would not ask me to open it. But mercy has a strange courage. It is not afraid to enter rooms where pride, regret, and grief have been sitting for years. It does not come to flatter us. It comes to bring us home. That is why an older believer can whisper this psalm beside a hospital bed. That is why someone can read it in a kitchen after a funeral, with one chair still too quiet across the table. That is why a person who cannot form a polished prayer can still hold one sentence like a trembling candle. The Lord is my shepherd. Mercy does not follow the version of you that finally got everything right. It follows the sheep that wandered and still belongs to the shepherd. And I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. The psalm begins with need. The Lord is my shepherd. It ends with belonging. I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. That is the journey of Psalm 23. Not from trouble to convenience, not from fear to a perfect life. Every image in the psalm has been moving toward this, not merely a calmer road, but a kept soul. Not merely rest for today, but belonging forever. The final gift is not pasture, water, safety, or abundance. The final gift is God Himself. To dwell in His house is to stop living like a spiritual orphan, always wondering whether you will be kept. It is to discover that the shepherd's care was never random. Every act of leading, restoring, protecting, correcting, feeding, and pursuing was bringing you toward home. And this is where John 10 gives Psalm 23 a brighter light. Jesus does not merely say He knows the way for the sheep. He says He is the good shepherd. He knows His own. He calls them by name. He lays down His life for them. So the shepherd of Psalm 23 is not distant poetry. He has a face. He has wounds. He has gone through death and come out the other side with His sheep still in His hands. The psalm began with a sheep in need. It ends with a child at home. Maybe the most faithful thing you can do today is not to understand the whole road. Maybe it is to stop walking one step ahead of the shepherd. Stop turning every fear into a map. Stop treating every desire like a voice from God. Stop calling exhaustion dedication when the shepherd is trying to make you lie down. Stop asking for the table while refusing to sit because your eyes are still fixed on the enemy. Place your hand on the closed door, the unanswered message, the unfinished plan, the ache you keep managing by yourself, and whisper what Psalm 23 has been teaching from the first line. I am not my own shepherd. That is where Psalm 23 stops being a verse you admire and becomes a road you enter. Not by changing every circumstance immediately, by changing who leads. The path may still be unclear, but the shepherd is not. If this message met you somewhere real, write this in the comments. I am not my own shepherd. Not because the valley is gone, not because the enemies have disappeared, not because you finally understand every turn, but because Psalm 23 does not promise that the sheep will understand every road. It promises that the shepherd will never lose his sheep.